Let me now take the opportunity to introduce Ray Perryman. There are two kinds of people, those who know him and those who are going to know him. He is one of the most influential and thoughtful economists. One of the first times I had a chance to work with him, I called him and he stepped out of kind of a noisy area. He said, "I'm sorry, look, I'm meeting with the Taiwan cabinet and just leaving the Secretary of the Treasury there, but I have a little time between noodles to speak to you." You know, I mean, I'm used to people telling me about being in Bonham. So anyway, with that, a smart guy who's going to help us understand the problem, Dr. Ray Perryman.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. It's a privilege to be here with you and to spend a few minutes talking to you. I'm going to try to shorten mine some to get us somewhat back on schedule and still have some time for some questions and comments from the audience and that sort of thing. If I start going too long, Roger, just give me this signal. Roger, as he mentioned, we've known each other a long time, and he knows me very well. And so when he was asked me to do this, he said, "Now, Ray, this is a very distinguished group of people. You can't say the kind of things you sometimes say when you get in front of them. You can't pick on anybody today." And I think what he meant was you can't pick on me. And I wasn't going to do that. I was going to say how much I respected him and how he's like a grandfather to me, but I'm not going to say that now. He wouldn't let me, okay? So I'm sorry, Roger, you don't get that compliment. But I guess I can pick on myself. So before I start, I'm going to give you just one quick anecdote about myself, something that happened recently, and kind of give you an insight into me. And it's kind of shouldn't do it because I'm adding to my resume here, and I shouldn't do this. But I grew up in Lindale, over close to Tyler in the Eastern District. And a couple of years ago, about a year ago, they were kind enough, they've started a Distinguished Alumni Award over there at the high school, or at the school district. They were kind enough to give me that award. And so I went over there and spent a couple of days, and I was talking to people. And my wife, Lorraine, who was mayor of Odessa at one time, had a very prominent career, but she grew up in a little bit bigger, considerably bigger town than I did. And she said, "Well, what was it like growing up in a town that small?" And I said, "Well, it was great, wonderful, wholesome, great place to grow up." But I said, "We had our challenges." I said, "We were so small that we actually had to have driver's education and sex education in the same car." And she thought about that for a second. She said, "Well, Ray, that makes sense. You don't drive very well either." So, so that's the level of respect I get, okay? So with that, I'm going to try to hit the high points. I think I don't even know how to use the PowerPoint thing, but I have one up here. I'm not good at this. If I just press it. Okay. Okay. I never use these things because I'm not organized enough, so I have about 5 slides. I'm going to skip a couple of them because, again, one of them talks about the need for the infrastructure in the Eastern District. I don't think I need to say any more about that than other people have eloquently said. But let me just spend a couple of minutes talking conceptually here about what we're talking about. You cannot have an economy that works without a court system that works. And we figured that out very, very early along. I mean, you can go all the way back to ancient Greece and read about Socrates' trial. I mean, we've had courts and trials for a long, long, long time. Once commerce got to be fairly significant at all, back in the Middle Ages, the merchants in Florence set up a system of courts to adjudicate claims between buyers and sellers and that sort of thing because you couldn't function without it. About that same time, the most prominent theologian of the Middle Ages, St. Thomas Aquinas, was writing a lot of things, and he was writing instructions to monks because back then the church had so much power, they conducted a lot of trials in the church. So what's the appropriate restitution? What kinds of things should you do when one person has somehow injured another person? And he wrote very extensively about this, and the concept he came up with when you translate it from Latin to English was just price. And actually, he did a very good job of that. Most modern economic analysis, we really don't extend what he came up with all that much. It's very, very close to what we economists today call long-run equilibrium price. I mean, he really nailed it. Really smart guy. But think how much just price sounds like reasonable royalty. Same concept. We're talking about the same concepts today we've been talking about a long time ago. It's just gotten a lot more complicated, as the judges have pointed out. One quick story. I'm on the board of a large corporation that's in an industry that's particularly vulnerable to cyber attacks. And I didn't even think about this. I just mentioned it in passing to Roger the other day, and he was so enamored by it, I'll share it with you. Not far from here, over at Alliance Airport, we have a $400 million facility, data center, okay? Not surprising, big company have a big data center. That's our redundant data center. It doesn't do anything. It's just that we've got $400 million invested in a data center in case somebody hacks the other data center. That's the extent to which cybercrime, very, very complex, impacts corporations. The better we can enforce laws to prevent that from happening, the more money is going to be free up for companies. And basically, when you start talking about this economically, which is the way my brain works, when you start talking about this issue economically, what you discover very quickly is that kind of the basic thing, if you've ever had an Econ 101 course, they told you first 4 or 5 pages, I hope, that consumers, investors, business people, doesn't matter, everybody is maximizing some kind of utility out there. It's personal satisfaction, it's their income, it's their profits. If they're a public company, it's the return to their shareholders. Whatever the case may be, there's something out there they're seeking to do better at all the time. And it's the incentive to do that better that generates is the nexus for all economic activity. And this notion's been embraced for a long time. Back when John Locke and others were writing the basic principles of Western civilization, they told us that, and a few years later, some of their disciples, like Adam Smith, brought it into talking about a capitalist system like we have, basically said, incentives are great, the private sector does a wonderful job on things, leave it alone, let it do what it does, except there are certain areas where the private sector can't do it by itself. And consequently, we have to have this system of laws and Western civilizations based on the notion that we collectively pay some money to the government in exchange for the things we can't do by ourselves. And as has been graphically illustrated today, we can't build all the roads we need to build by ourselves, individually. We can't get the kind of schools we need by ourselves, individually. And we can't protect public safety, contracts, and commerce individually. It requires a public, well-funded, adequately staffed system of justice to do that. And it comes down to some very basic things. I always most economists make a living making economics complicated so people can't understand it. I try to do just the opposite. I try to get it simple enough that I can understand it and hopefully some other folks can. When you strip away everything else there is about economics and you get right down to it, there are basically 2 ways you can make an economy bigger. 2 ways, and that's it. You can get more factors of production, or better, or implement them better, but you can get more labor, capital, economic activity going on out there. Or you can use what you have more efficiently. That's it. You're constrained by the resources you have and how much you can make them better, and then how you use them. Well, let's think about that in terms of the court system, because my biggest issue right now is I'm going to give you some numbers in a few minutes, and they're decently sized numbers, and of what this means. And I want you to kind of understand how it could be. How in the world could adding a couple of judges and a couple of judgeships, how could that possibly make much of a difference in the economy? Well, let's think about it a minute. We were told today how many cases are over 3 years old. Several folks have talked about the delays in the court system. Well, let's think about that for just 1 second, okay? And this is in terms of the efficiency of those factors of production, because you either got to get more and better, or you got to get the ones you have more efficient. Every time a case lingers longer than it should, that's a major case involving a corporation, they are required by law to assess that case, figure out what it's probably going to cost them at the end of the day, and reserve for that. What that means is those funds are basically sitting over here somewhere in treasury bills. They're not out building factories. They're not out employing people. They're not out bringing out new products. They're sitting over here on the sidelines. If you can get them off the sidelines faster, you promote commerce. Okay? Predictability is very, very important. Anytime any company makes an investment, they either do it directly, most of them do it directly with spreadsheets, but if they don't do it directly, they certainly do it in their heads in some form or fashion, whether it's a tiny small business or a major business. They make what's called a present value calculation. They look at the cost of doing whatever it is they're going to do, and they look at the future benefits of it, and they put them in terms and say, does this make sense for us to do this? One aspect of that is how much risk is associated with that. If they're in a situation where they're vulnerable to crime, be it the public safety of their employees or something like cyber crime or some of the complex crimes we deal with today, or if they're vulnerable to being involved in a legal system where they may get held up for a couple of years with their capital tied up, they say, hey, that's a risk I have to factor into this situation. Consequently, I have to, in technical terms, raise my discount rate, but in basically say, if I put more risk in it, I show less expected return, so I do fewer projects. Or alternatively, I go someplace else where it's not that way and do the project there. Either way, the economy of the area you're talking about suffers. Okay? So those are all issues in terms of efficiency. The other thing is, when you start talking about the complexity, and obviously we know the world's a lot more complex with globalization, international situations, everything we deal with today, and technology. The technology basically requires innovation. Innovation requires people to feel like that their intellectual property is going to be protected, that they'll be fairly compensated for their intellectual property if they take the risk of developing that international intellectual property. That's another thing they have to rely on a court system to do. There's all sorts of things out there that constantly require businesses to focus on the court system. And consequently, when that court system gets clogged up, commerce cannot move as fast as it would otherwise. It can move fast. It's certainly moving fast in Collin and Denton counties. You've heard plenty of indications about that. But it could be doing better with a more efficient judiciary. And that's the whole point behind this study we did. And when I thought about it and tried to put a title on it, we always try to put this little clever title at the top and then a subtitle that tells what it is. That's what some marketing person told me sometimes you're supposed to do, so I always try to do that. The title we put on this one was, "And Justice for All." Last 4 words of the Pledge of Allegiance. And let's think about that a minute. We all stood up today and we said the Pledge of Allegiance, and we all know the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'll dare say we probably didn't put a whole lot of thought into it as we said it. But let's think about it for a second. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God. All of that describes the flag and the country it stands for, all those words. And then we put a qualifier on it. What is it that this country under God stands for? Liberty and justice for all. That's the only other thing. It doesn't list anything else. Of all the rights in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, everything else, and all of them address these issues. And one of our biggest complaints against England when we declared independence was how the king controlled the courts and you couldn't get a fair justice system. This idea has been around. But the things we say, the thing that's the cornerstone that we all stand up and say day after day after day is liberty and justice for all. Well, liberty is threatened and justice is certainly threatened if you don't have an adequate court system. What we try to do, and what we try to do a lot of times, is take that notion and translate it into numbers. Okay? And we studied a lot of academic literature, a lot of things have been done. We've done a lot of studies over the years of different aspects of the judiciary. And different people have looked at it different ways. I want to try to capture it as broadly as possible while still being consistent with good, solid economic principles. I've got another slide here that's, did I do that right? I did. That's all the challenges in the Eastern District. We've talked about that enough, so I'm going to flip on over this one. And it may be hard to read, but it'll be on our website, PerrymanGroup.com, tomorrow, and it'll be some other places I know, and you may have copies of it. I'm not sure. We'll make sure you can see it any place you want to see it. Basically, we ask a question. Let's say a couple of questions. Let's say in the next couple of years, we could get these 2 vacant judgeships filled in the district. And then let's say we could get a couple of judgeships added and filled. Take a couple of years to do that, and that's optimistic probably. But we had to do it with something. Then let's run the economy forward for a few years. I just went to 2030 because too much change if you go too far out. But I had to go far enough out for this to work its way through the system and for you to start seeing the results of all this come into play and really affect people's knowledge and the way they make financial decisions and that sort of thing. And there's some very good literature out there from a long time ago that demonstrated how public institutions impact the economy. And it's been studied in over 150 countries. It's been cited hundreds of times. Very, very reliable stuff. We're able to take that basic framework that's been around for a while and narrow it down to the local economy of the Eastern District. I also pulled out the Sherman Division and the Tyler Division because they're the places that have the most need right now. Sherman in particular, the Sherman Division in particular, the ones that have empty courtroom to put somebody in as well, and that's also important in this process. And so we looked at that. And besides that, I'm from the Tyler Division, so it got in. What can I say? So anyway, so I did all of that and came up with some numbers. And basically, if we can get the 2 judgeships filled and put in place, it's worth about 78,000 jobs in the Eastern District of Texas by 2030, and over $11 billion in additional output. Roughly what that means is the growth rate increases by about 0.3%. Not a huge amount. I mean, this area's been growing 5-6% a year or more some years, it's been pointed out. So it's not a huge percentage, but enough that over time that becomes a very significant number. If we could do that plus add the 2 judgeships, those numbers almost double, not quite. And the reason they don't quite double is kind of the law of diminishing returns. As you all know, the difference in 1 judge and 2 makes more of a difference than just the difference between 14 judges and 15. You know, you have a little bit of diminishing return there to that, but not too much at this stage because of the critical situation you're in. And so it goes to about 148,000 jobs in the district. 60+% of those are in the Sherman Division, as you would expect. But the interesting thing is that add together the Sherman Division, add together the Tyler Division, you get about 80% of the total. There's still a nice chunk of it that goes to the other part of the district. Because as has been pointed out, folks are driving from place to place. It affects the efficiency of the entire judiciary in this district. The caseloads are high in some places besides these places. And so as a result of that, you're increasing the efficiency of the entire system when you take that pressure off. And so there's some spillover effects to the other part of the economy as well. And so basically, that's the message I want to leave you with. That one gets up to not quite 0.6% a year, a little over 0.5% a year additional growth. So again, significant amount of positive economic impact associated with this. So I bring all that up to simply say it is a critical situation. It was pointed out today that Collin and Denton counties are growing in the last 4 years at 13.7% or so. To give you a perspective, that's about a 3-point-something% compounded annual growth rate in population. The country over the same period's compounded annual growth rate was less than 0.8%. So you're talking about almost 4.5 times the rate of growth. And yet the infrastructure is not keeping up. And that growth is in very complex industries. When you bring a Toyota in, and you bring a bunch of Toyota suppliers in, you're bringing in, just think of the types of litigation that affect the auto industry, and think of the potential crime associated with that. When you bring in those kind of companies, you add a lot of complexity. You layer on a lot that's going on here. Think of everything that's involved in making a car. And every one of those things is vulnerable, and what we've just done is create a venue. Okay? And so it's a wonderful thing for the area. It's great for economic development, but it also adds complexity to the judicial system. So my point in all of this is, it's a very important issue for all the reasons that have been stated. The personal issues. One thing, I've been on some calls with Judge Clark and Roger and Judge Self and others as they've done the wonderful, marvelous work, and everyone else to put this together. But one of the things been pointed out, when you have judges making that 600-mile round trip, what if we have a car accident? What if a judge gets sick? They're definitely overworked. I'm sure overstressed. What if a judge gets sick? You've got some serious issues here that could get a lot more serious, God forbid, very quickly. It wouldn't take much for this to become a much more serious situation than it already is. So it's an important issue. It needs to be addressed. My point in it today was simply to add some quantification to the wonderful things that have been said here and say, this is important. If we truly want to have justice for all in this area, this investment needs to be made. Thank you very much.
As proof of how close Ray and I are, when I greeted him today, I said, "What do you think of my pink tie?" And he said, dull trial lawyers usually need bright ties. So we're about as close as they come publicly. I want to say thank you to Dr. Perryman.